Hey, hey, Disney fans, planners, and reluctant visitors. I'm Becky, and this is TouringPlans Teaches. This week, we've got Walt Disney World Resorts episode 302 for you, and this is all of the DVC data. So we're going to talk about satisfaction versus cost for all of the DVC resorts, as well as the best buildings according to satisfaction at each resort, and the most requested rooms. So it's a full extravaganza with all the data packed into one episode. I'm really excited about it, and I hope you are too. We're going to start by looking at all of the resorts together in a series of charts so we can compare between them. And the things we're going to compare are satisfaction and cost. Now, cost is down on our x-axis, and this isn't in dollars like it was for the value, moderates, or deluxes. It's in points. So to stay at a DVC resort, if you're a DVC owner, you're spending a certain number of points per night. You can rent those points from other DVC owners, or you can pay out of pocket. But for the most part, you're paying with points. So points are that unit of currency. Points are what we're going to see on our chart. To the far right are the more expensive resorts. To the left are the least expensive ones. And then we've got our vertical axis, the y-axis, and there we have our satisfaction. Satisfaction is rated on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 is very dissatisfied, you really hate it there. 5 is very satisfied, and that's our perfect score. Now you'll notice on most of these charts, the range is something like 4.3 at the bottom to 5. So that's still pretty stinking satisfied even at the bottom of our range. We're nitpicking a little bit here, but we're doing that on purpose. At these sorts of rates per night, you want to be really, really satisfied, and you want that to be as close to 5 as possible. So we're aiming for the top of the chart. On each of these charts, you'll see a dotted blue line, and that's our trend, our average. So that's about how much satisfaction you could expect for that points per night across all of the resorts. On top of that, we have a gray dotted line, and below it we have an orange dotted line. Those mark out our 95% confidence interval. So in our stats world, we're pretty confident that the real average, the real trend, falls between those two dotted lines. And so we're only going to call things outliers and really above average or really below average if they fall outside of all of the dotted lines. So on our overall chart, which is this one, we can see a few things. The first is that only one dot falls all the way below that orange dotted line. So there's one resort that's below average for satisfaction given its cost, and that's Boulder Ridge. Now, if you watched our last video on the introduction to all the DVC resorts, this probably doesn't surprise you. It's a little bit of an older resort, and Wilderness Lodge and Copper Creek, which are both co-located with Boulder Ridge, both score better than Boulder Ridge. So a lot of people are opting to stay away from Boulder Ridge in general, but it's at least not incredibly expensive. The one dot that we see that almost breaks out of the top dotted line is the Polynesian. And this might be surprising because the Polynesian actually shows up pretty far to the left on this chart. This is why this chart can be a little bit confusing. This is overall average price per room. But Polynesian is different than all of the other DVC resorts because it only has 2 room types. It has the incredibly expensive bungalows, which should make its dot go further to the right. But the only other room type it has is studios, and those are the cheapest room type, and it has a lot of them. So those overpower the bungalows. It doesn't have 1 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms or grand villas to bring that price up. So it looks like the Polynesian is really cheap to stay at, but that's because if you're staying there, you're probably staying in a studio, which is the cheapest room type. So we can see that this chart might be a little misleading because it's not accounting for the various room types. So next we're going to go through room type specific charts to see if we can pick out the trends for each of those. We're going to start with the cheapest room type, and that's our studios. This is a pretty standard hotel room that you're used to, except it has a little miniature kitchenette that most Disney resorts don't have. Now, if we look for the Polynesian dot, on our last chart it was all the way to the left, making the Polynesian look really cheap. Instead, if we just narrow down to the studios at the Polynesian are the most expensive studios on average. It's because you have a lot of lake views that are really expensive, and it's just a popular resort with limited supply. That's why they're building a whole new tower there. So now Polynesian aren't the cheapest anymore. They're pretty expensive, and they're just ever so slightly below average on that satisfaction you would expect for their price. You can also see on this chart we still only have one dot that's below that orange line at the bottom. That's still Boulder Ridge. So you're getting less satisfaction at the Boulder Ridge studios specifically than you would expect for their cost per night. We also have one other dot that's really close to that bottom line, and that's Jambo. Jambo's satisfaction also pretty low. Keep in mind, Jambo studio rooms are pretty small. The ones at Kidani are slightly bigger, and we see that Kidani has a little bit higher satisfaction, so that might be a difference maker there. Now, no dots go above our gray dotted line, so nothing is significantly above average. That being said, Saratoga has the highest difference between the average line and its dot, so it's the best satisfaction for its price that you can expect from any studio. So if you want high satisfaction for your money, a studio at Saratoga Springs could be the right choice for you. Now we're moving on up as far as expensive rooms and more space are concerned to the one-bedroom villas. So these sleep the same number of people as studios do, typically, but they get you more space and a separate bedroom. We see very similar trends here compared to the studio rooms. Polynesian dropped off because there are no one-bedroom villas at the Polynesian, and our two resorts that are really close to being outside that orange line are Boulder Ridge and Jambo again. Interestingly, compared to our last picture, where Kidani and Jambo were almost the exact same price, but significantly different satisfaction, here we've got two things going against Jambo. It's on average more expensive per night than Kidani, and it has lower satisfaction. This is because at Jambo you have a higher proportion of those Savannah one-bedrooms than you do at Kidani. So you're paying more for the Savannah rooms, and there's more of them, so they drag that average price up for the one-bedroom villas. And they have lower satisfaction. They're smaller than the one-bedroom villas at Kidani. So if you've narrowed your search down to Animal Kingdom Lodge, these charts can be really helpful. You probably want to request something in Kidani compared to Jambo. It's closer to that average line. And again, if we look for the resorts that are doing the best, we don't have anything above the gray line, so statistically I can't tell you that one's an outlier and really great. But we can look at which ones are the furthest above the blue line, that are getting the closest to that gray line. And in this case, Old Key West and Saratoga Springs sort of tie for that winner of the one-bedroom villas as far as value is concerned. They're both the cheapest. Old Key West has a lot of space, and they have relatively high satisfaction. So those are both good choices if you're looking for a one-bedroom villa. Now we're going to get even more expensive and more room with our two-bedroom villas. So these typically sleep 8 or 9 people, and you're paying many more points per night than you would for the studio or the one-bedroom. And again, we've got our blue line and then our orange and gray lines that show our outliers. Interesting note here. So we've always had Boulder Ridge below that orange line as sort of the negative outlier. That doesn't change here. Still lower satisfaction than you would expect for its cost. But now instead of being joined by Jambo, Jambo's actually not on this chart because it doesn't have any dedicated two-bedroom villas. It only has lock-offs. It's joined by Riviera. This is the first time Riviera has come even close to that bottom line. But the two-bedroom villas specifically at Riviera, for whatever reason, don't score as high on satisfaction as you would expect given their really, really high cost. The two bedrooms that do score the best compared to their cost are at the Grand Floridian. So you have to go all the way to the right. The most expensive two-bedroom villas actually outperform what you would expect the best compared to any other resort. They're better than Saratoga Springs. They're better than Old Key West. They're further above that blue average line. But you're paying a lot. So one thing to notice about this chart as a whole is that trend line is almost flat. So the difference between a 4.6, which would cost you should expect about 34 points per night, and a 4.7, which would cost you about 64 points per night, is 30 points per night. And if we use a rough average of $20 per point, which is actually pretty low, you can find deals for better than that. That's like $600 a night difference between a 4.6 and a 4.7. That's a little bit crazy, and so you have to take that into consideration while you're making these decisions. And finally, we've got our really big splurges. If you're staying at a grand villa, probably cost isn't factoring much into your decision anyway, but we can still look at the trend here. And finally, Boulder Ridge gets a reprieve, but that's only because there are no grand villas at Boulder Ridge, so it can't appear on our chart anyway. Instead, Jumbo is the one that falls below the line here. It's the exact same point cost as grand villas at Kidani, with significantly worse satisfaction scores, so it drops below, while Kidani is just below-ish average, but still within that acceptable range. Our best grand villas, most satisfaction for their cost, are at Old Key West. It almost pops up above that line, just not quite. You're getting a lot of space, and they're the cheapest. You can stay in a grand villa at Old Key West for less than you can stay in a 2-bedroom at Grand Floridian, for example. So if you're looking to stay in a grand villa and splurge, but not quite break the bank, probably Old Key West is your best bet. Now we're going to transition away from looking at all the resorts together at once and assume that you've picked a resort. Once you've picked one, now you should want to know where within that resort you should want to stay to maximize your chances of high satisfaction. So what's the best building? What are the most requested rooms? We'll look at each resort individually to figure that out. And we're going to start with the cheapest and often the best value, and that's Old Key West. Old Key West is a really big resort. It has 49 different buildings to choose from, so there's a lot of decisions to be made here. But if we look at the resort with the highest satisfaction since the pandemic, so this is after it's reopened, it's actually building 45, which is way over here on the map of the resort. It's really far away from the main building, but it's pretty close to a pool and to transportation. It's very quiet and secluded, lots of river views off of the back porches of this building, but you're going to be far away from dining options. At least you'll have a bus close and you can get to the pool. But if you're looking for quiet and seclusion, Building 45 is for you. One note here, Building 45 does not have an elevator. Very few of the buildings in Old Key West do, so if you're someone that needs an elevator, then you'll need to request a different building or request the first floor of Building 45. Our most requested room at Old Key West isn't in Building 45, it's actually in Building 62. It's room 6213, which is on the first floor of Building 62, and it's a standard view 2-bedroom. You can see here that the standard view actually gets you this gorgeous view of some water here, and it's really close to the main building. It's not incredibly close to transportation or a pool though, but it does have an elevator, so even though this room is on the first floor, if you get anything within this building, you will have an elevator. So we've got quite a few requests for this room, and of the people that have rated this room for us, it scores a perfect 5 out of 5. So if you want a place that's close to the main building, Old Key West, that scores really well, 6213 is a good choice. Our next resort that we're going to talk about is Saratoga Springs. So Saratoga Springs has the most villas of any DVC resort. It doesn't have as many buildings as Old Key West, so they're more compact. Still has quite a few to choose from though. The one with the highest satisfaction since reopening is Grandstand Building 16. So you can see it circled here on the map. It's really close to the main building. It has really easy access to transportation and a pool, but it's not right in the middle of the action either. So you get sort of the best of both worlds here. Close to things, but still pretty quiet. But our most requested room isn't in Building 16. It's in the second highest rated building. So the second highest rated building is right by Disney Springs, and in it is our most requested room. Room 1423 is a preferred studio room, and it's actually on the 4th floor of this building. So as you can see here, it's got a beautiful view of Disney Springs. It's elevated enough that you can see most of the main buildings there, and it has a very quick walk to Disney Springs as well. You're in the closest building to Disney Springs. Once again, this room has a perfect 5 rating out of 5 from people that have stayed there and rated their satisfaction. So if you're looking for something that's close to Disney Springs where you can see all of the action over there from your room, 1423 is a good option. Next, we've got the Riviera Resort, which is the last of the 3 dedicated DVC resorts, and it's also the newest DVC resort. It opened just before the pandemic. Here we're not going to talk about the best building because there is only one building, so it's the best and the worst by default. But we'll talk about the most requested room because this could give you some information as to what you might want to look for when you stay there. Our most requested room is 8827, which is on the 8th floor of the building, pretty high up, but you're close to the elevators, so it's not a long walk to those. You're far away enough from the elevators, though, that it's not super loud either. Really, the kicker here is that this is a standard studio, and yet you have this view that you can see. Picture-perfect view of Spaceship Earth, which also means that if you're in your room at night, you can see the harmonious fireworks from there too. So this is a great sort of cheaty room where you're not paying for a preferred view, you have a standard view, and you can see fireworks from your room. Excellent. Now we're going to move on to Animal Kingdom Lodge. Animal Kingdom Lodge we'll talk about as a whole, both Kidani and Jambo. And if we look at what the best area of that whole lodge is, it turns out to be the Zebra Trail, which is part of Jambo. This is interesting because Jambo didn't fare too well on our points versus satisfaction charts, but Zebra Trail specifically has a really high portion of savanna and pool views that people tend to like. So if you're just aiming for a generic area of the resort, you might want to try for Zebra Trail. That being said, our most requested room is actually over in Kidani. So room 7208 is a Savannah View studio, so it's not one of those sneaky secret Savannah views. People actually want to pay for this Savannah view, and it's on the 2nd floor, which is a little misleading because the 2nd floor is the same floor as the lobby. So this room is literally steps away from the lobby, but it has good noise insulation, so you're not hearing too much action from that lobby either. Kidani has a smaller lobby, it doesn't have much congregation there, so you don't have a lot of that noise that you would expect from being that close. My major win for this room is that it's literally steps away from Sana'a. So you could go get yourself bread service for every meal and be a happy camper. That's probably why this room has a perfect 5.0 rating. You also get picture-perfect savanna views. Those savannas are sort of designed to make the view right out the back porch from the lobby look amazing to all of the visitors, and you're in a room that's really, really close to that, so you're getting exactly what the Imagineers designed when they had this resort in mind. Now we're going to talk about Boulder Ridge. This is the resort that scored below average for almost every room type. But if you are staying here, there are some great rooms to try to pick from. The most requested room we have at this resort is room 4531. So this is a standard studio room. It's on the 4th floor, but it's a corner room. So it actually has more space, more square footage than the average studio room. And as you can see, it has a pretty great view of the pool, of the main building, of cabins, and the lagoon beyond those. So it's a nice relaxing view from a bigger room. It still has a little bit of a hike to transportation and dining, but it's much better than the rooms that would be at the tail end of this building, for example. It has a pretty decent location given the long layout of this resort. At Boulder Ridge's sister resort, Copper Creek, we've got the sort of standard rooms in the main building, as well as the cabins around the lagoon. Here, our most requested room is room 5133, which is in that main building. This most requested room is pretty unique. It's the only one bedroom that pops up as being the most requested at any resort. This is a standard view 1 bedroom, and it's at the end of the hall next to a grand villa, so it has a slightly different layout than most of the other 1 bedrooms as well. People comment that it's a more helpful layout. The bathrooms are laid out a little bit more differently. But the real standout here is the view. It's a standard view, but you're elevated enough that you're typically able to see fireworks from over the other edge of the main building of Wilderness Lodge. And so having a standard view and a good layout and a fireworks view combines to be a really excellent room at Copper Creek. We're moving right along to our monorail area resorts, and the first of those is Bay Lake Tower, which is at the Contemporary Resort. This is another weird most requested room. Typically when we see most requested rooms, it's rooms that get you a view that you're paying less for than you would expect. Not the case here. The most requested room at Bay Lake Tower is room 8218. It's on the 12th floor of Bay Lake Tower, and it is a theme park view studio. So this is one of the most expensive studio rooms that you can book anywhere at Walt Disney World, and it's because of that view. But you have to admit, the view is pretty spectacular. You have that bird's eye view of Cinderella's castle and Space Mountain. When the fireworks go off at night, you can see all of those perfectly. This is a view I would love waking up to each morning. But the average satisfaction at this room is only 3.5. That is ridiculously low compared to all of the other rooms that we've been talking about, and the whole resort-wide average too. I think we might have a case here of people seeing this picture, loving it, but then having to pay the bill and realizing maybe it wasn't quite worth what they were hoping for. So I've got Becky's special trick for you for this episode, and it's at this resort. Instead of 8218, I would suggest requesting 8208. It's right down the hall, and it's a slightly less expensive view type, but all you have to do, instead of looking straight forward to get this perfect view, you look a little to the left, and you get this exact same view for a lot cheaper per night. So if you're following Becky's rules, don't request 8218 and pay huge amounts of money. 8208 for the win at Bay Lake Tower. Over at the Polynesian, if you're staying in the DVC part, you have 3 buildings to choose from: Moorea, Pago Pago, and Tokelau. Tokelau turns out to be the winner here. And most of that's because it has a little something for everyone. You can stay in Tokelau and get pretty much whatever room type you would want. You can be close to a pool or facing away from it. You can be right on the beach almost, or you can be really close to the main building. So it all comes down to what room you request. But overall, Tokelau has really high satisfaction scores. Our most requested room at Tokelau is room 3914. And this is actually our most requested room across all of Walt Disney World, DVC or not. And room 3914 by itself has over 1,500 room requests in TouringPlans system. That's more than most resorts as a whole have. In fact, we have so many requests for room 3914. If we got everyone to coordinate and just use the room back to back to back, we could book it for just TouringPlans users that have requested it for over 20 years. We could just have this room to ourselves. It would be great. So what's so awesome about room 3914 that makes it such a standout? The thing is, it's a standard studio room, and it's on the 3rd floor, and it's on that very tippy top corner right by the lagoon. So that means when you're out on your balcony, you can actually see Magic Kingdom. You have a much better theme park view than the actual theme park view rooms for the regular part of the Polynesian resort. So you can see the fireworks, you've got the castle, you have a really great location. This is the perfect room for getting sort of that sneaky view that you're not really paying for. So if you want to join the hordes of people that request 3914, go for it. Or pull up the room finder and request one of the rooms right around it, maybe on the other side of Tokelau or just a couple rooms down, and you'll get something very similar, and you won't be competing against all of the other TouringPlans users that are requesting this specific room. Now we're going to wrap up our monorail loop with the Grand Floridian. If you're still sticking with me, you definitely get bonus points because goodness, this has been a haul across all of these resorts. The Grand Floridian, as a DVC resort, you currently only have 1 building to choose from. That's going to change within a matter of weeks of this video posting because another building is getting converted over for DVC use. But for now, we have our one sort of T-shaped building. And our most requested room here is room 1514. And it's on the corner of sort of that left upper part of the T. 1514 is a Lakeview studio on the 5th floor of that building. 5th floor means it's quite a haul from the main building, from transportation, from dining, but it also means you have a really great elevated view. You actually have panoramic views of almost the entire lagoon. You can see the Grand Floridian, you can see the Contemporary, And just over another building, and that's why the elevation is important, you can catch a sneak peek of Cinderella's castle. You also have Space Mountain, and this means that you can get some pretty great fireworks views from this room. All of our ratings from this room are that perfect 5. So if you're looking for a studio at the villas at Grand Floridian, 1514 is a good choice. We're finally going to move over to Crescent Lake for our last 2 DVC resorts. The first of those are the Boardwalk villas. Boardwalk does technically have 2 different buildings, but they have almost the exact same satisfaction scores. In the north building, you have quick access to the boardwalk itself and to Epcot. In the south building, you're closer to Hollywood Studios, and you've got a little bit more quiet and seclusion. You're not going to be hearing the noise from the boardwalk at night. The north building just barely edges out the south building, and I'm talking by the smallest possible margin. So really it's going to come down to your vacation style and where you're going to be visiting more and what you prioritize, whether you want north building or south building. If we take a look at our most requested room for this resort, it's room 5053, and it is in that north building. 5053 is a garden/pool view studio. But if you look at this picture, you can tell this isn't really a garden or a pool, it is Crescent Lake. So 5053 is really high up in the north building, and it's the closest that you can get to being on the boardwalk without paying for that boardwalk and lake view. So you're paying a slightly lesser rate to be a little bit off the boardwalk, which means you're going to get a little bit of noise at night, but you have this great view for less costs. We have a 4.75 average rating here, so it's not perfect, but it's really, really good. If you'd like to see the boardwalk from your room, but not pay those high rates, 5053 is what you should request. We're going to wrap things up at the Beach Club. Beach Club is unique because all of the rooms there are the same view type. Everything is a standard view, so you don't have to figure out, well, is it worth it for preferred? No, because they're all standard. So your actual view that you're going to get becomes pretty important, as well as the location, because Beach Club is set up as a sort of horseshoe. So if you're on the really far edge of the horseshoe, you've got a long walk to anything that you want to get to. Our most requested room here comes up with a nice balance. It's room 555, easy to remember, and it's a standard studio. But as you can see, it has a really great view of Spaceship Earth. You also get to see the harmonious fireworks from here, and it's not too far from elevators or transportation or wherever you need to walk to. Our average rating here is 4.75, so if you want to stay at the Beach Club Villas and make sure you have somewhat easy access to all of your amenities and a great view, request room 555. Yay, we made it! We finally made it through all of the DVC data. You know everything you need to know about satisfaction versus cost for these resorts. Some things to remember. Boulder Ridge always falls below average, so if you want to stay at Wilderness Lodge for DVC, probably choose Copper Creek instead. On the flip side of things, Old Key West and Saratoga Springs always perform pretty well. They're typically above average. Not statistically, but they're the ones that are furthest above that blue line. They're relatively cheap, and Old Key West especially has a lot of space. Another thing we saw repeatedly was that Kidani scores better than Jambo. A lot of that has to do with the bigger space there. Often they're the same points. But you've also got Sana'a at Kidani, so that probably makes a difference, at least it would for me. We also looked at the best buildings and the most requested rooms, so you can scroll back to that information, but we also have blog posts if you want to go back and review that later. Thanks for joining me this week. Next week, we're going to talk about how you can rent DVC points. That's one of the best ways to save money on your Disney vacation as a whole. It's how my family usually travels to Disney. So join me next week to get that tutorial. Thanks.